Hello, folks. Welcome back to Jazz Appreciation. This week we're going to be talking about the Avant-Garde period, the very out there period in jazz, the type of jazz that a lot of people find exceptionally difficult to listen to. There are some avant-garde jazz pieces that I cannot even listen to. It's just too much going on, and it's truly music that you cannot dance to. So, as always, folks, you can find this presentation on our Google Classroom if you wish to go through it at your own pace. All right, let's begin. So, just so everybody's aware, I'm not going to read everything on these slides. There's a lot of information here to help you answer this week's discussion question, but it would be exceptionally boring for me to read through every single part. All right, so avant-garde, what is it? Well, it was originally used to denote the military advanced guard. It eventually came to refer to pioneering work in the arts, so things that are quite free and out there. So avant-gardism was meant to liberate artists from tradition and free them from the bounds of whatever art form they are creating. And it often went hand in hand with progressive social thought. So what was happening around them in terms of the politics and the way society thought, that's what was reflected in the art that they produced. That can be paintings as well as music. Now, two prominent avant-garde movements of the 20th century gathered steam following the World Wars. Jazz was exceptionally vital to both of them. Excuse me. And so we get this idea of free jazz. Jazz without rules, without structure, really. Okay, and this was just the cover art of LP albums became really popular in this time period in the late 1960s through to the 1970s. Okay, we get this wave of avant-garde style. There's two waves, actually, So the 1920s, avant-garde deliberately set out to break with the artistic past. It was a response to World War I and the expansion of women's rights and technological advances, including the radio, talking pictures, which you don't like video, okay, and transcontinental flight, being able to fly across the ocean, okay. And this avant-garde was provocative, but it was very hopeful, and jazz was considered by the cultural elite to be an inspiration and resource for the avant-garde period. Now, the second wave happened in the 1950s and 60s, which paralleled or was very similar to that of the 1920s. Okay, with the Cold War, the struggle for racial equality, the demands of gender equality, and the unraveling of some settled social conventions. Okay, and these conditions created a very different feel for the avant-garde style of music. Okay, one that reflected uncertainty and anguish. So, why do we call it avant-garde? Well, earlier names for avant-garde include anti-jazz, because it wasn't structured, it was very free jazz. Or free jazz, that's the other nickname for it. Okay, not quite the same style as any jazz that we've ever heard from up until this point. It's also called a black music or African American music, okay, which indicates the ferocity of the music, which is an awful nickname to use, which died away very, very quickly, that nickname. And would not be acceptable in today's world. Okay, we also have got this idea of new music or the new thing, right? Revolutionary music, fire music, and Cecil Taylor was one of the first to do this. Okay, on his album Jazz Advance. Avant-garde became an umbrella term for this new style of music, which included differences in rhythm. Okay, it threw away the idea of a steady dance beat. Avant-garde music cannot be danced to. Well, I suppose... Okay, that's not true. I suppose it can be danced to, but it's a lot of... It'll be a lot of flailing and kind of like jarging around like this. Right? It wouldn't... There's no specific steady dance beat. The harmonies are very... they're also thrown out. Okay, very unpredictable. Lots of really strange stretching of these harmonies and dissonance. That is not quite as pleasing to the ear as some may like. Okay, lots of noise. Lots of noise in avant-garde music. Lots of notes being played very, very quickly in and not a really steady tempo. Okay, the instrumentation. You've got a lot of your typical jazz instruments. Okay, and the introduction of a lot of world instruments as well, such as djembe drums and marimba type style xylophones, as well as the sitar was also used quite predominantly here, which is a strung instrument that came over from India. We have a couple of artists. Ornette Coleman, very famous composer. Okay, worked with Miles Davis and Charles Mingus that we talked about last week, and he actually won a Pulitzer Prize. He won the first Pulitzer Prize, ever awarded to a musical album. Okay, and Pulitzer Prizes are given out. They're art awards given out to all different avenues of art. Music, paintings, drama, and so on. And here is Ornette Coleman, okay, playing the alto saxophone. Okay, I'm not going to read through it. We're just going to touch base on these artists very quickly. Okay, also, so Coleman worked with a gentleman named Don Cherry, okay, who played the he played the trumpet. He's very good at the trumpet. But in this photo, we get this kind of new style of instrument technology, plastic or toy instruments. And both Coleman and Don Cherry played these plastic instruments in 1960 at the Monterey Jazz Festival in California. We then get Cecil Taylor. Okay, he is a very, unlike the leaders of other styles of jazz, who share more or less the same background. The leaders of these avant-garde groups, okay, come from very different or divergent backgrounds. When you compare it to rhythm and blues, R&B, or even that swing style of jazz. Okay, we have Coltrane from jazz music, and we have this guy, Cecil Taylor. He comes from the classical side of music. And he was the first to record with his own group, and he was the last to achieve any kind of recognition in the avant-garde music period. Okay, his style was derived on blues and both bebop and hard bop, that cool jazz style. Okay, and he personalized it to this new style of avant-garde. Very, very fast-paced, lots of notes in these kind of strange harmonies that you don't hear very often in older styles of jazz. Okay, and here we have Lester Young, who we've talked about numerous times, as well as Hank Jones. Okay, and this is outside Five Spot Cafe in 1958. Okay, and here we have Lester Young. Okay, he plays saxophone, and then we have Hank Jones, who's a very good piano player. Now, the Five Spot Cafe Club, okay, was better known for long engagements by Thelonious Monk, Coleman, Cecil Taylor, and Mingus, and it was a very, very good hotspot, a very good place to listen to and play jazz. Even in this strange style of avant-garde music, the Five Spot Cafe really took in those artists because avant-garde jazz music was popular with a very specific niche of people. And here we have Cecil Taylor, okay, great piano player. Okay, he used to always wear these beanies, and he often wore sunglasses. But the beanie is kind of the beanie and the sideburn chops are really kind of quintessential to Cecil Taylor and his playing in the 1970s. So avant-garde music, remember one of its nicknames was that the new thing. Okay, it divided the jazz world in half. You have the old school people who really took true heart to took jazz to the kind of swing, cool jazz, bebop, hard bop era. And then the other side of the jazz world, where you got this new school style, this new thing, this new avant-garde, very free jazz movement. So there's two different camps, the traditional and the more free. And John Coltrane, okay, he was very well respected for mastering the bop and avant-garde idioms, and he became kind of this iconic figure for African American people especially in the United States. He was this iconic figure in terms of the sound that he produced, which gave kind of rise to this revolution. It gave the theme songs, the music for the civil rights movement in the late 1960s all the way through to the 1980s. We've got another musician, Eric Dolphy. Okay, he is a reed player. Okay, he played in a lot of dance bands in the late 1940s, but then his style changed in the late 1960s into the 70s when he met Coleman and as well as Coltrane, toured with Coltrane. And they really, both Coleman and Coltrane, and Mingus for that fact, inspired Dolphy to play in a certain style, a certain way. And he built on his previous knowledge from the bebop and that kind of cool jazz era. And he built on that he built on the chord progressions from that style to give this new avant-garde waveform of music. Okay, and he played non-traditional instruments in jazz music. Okay. He popularized the idea of using the bass clarinet in jazz-style music, especially in this strange avant-garde style in the late 1960s and into the 1970s. Okay, he also played the saxophone and flute, and he brought a lot of energy to the very classical conservatory style of music, but pushed it forward into the avant-garde jazz scene. We also get Albert Taylor. Okay, a very, very famous and influential musician into the late 1960s, early 1970s. Okay, he played tenor saxophone, primarily tenor saxophone. Okay, and he's one of the revolutionary stars of avant-garde music in the 1960s. Now we get this idea of the three paradoxes, the three different lines, the three avenues of avant-garde jazz. Okay. It pushed the limits of jazz music, and it almost killed it. It almost killed jazz, almost. Okay, it upped the emotional expressiveness of the music. Okay, but audience really liked the old style of jazz, the kind of swing, the bebop, hard bop, cool jazz style, which was much easier to move to find the beat, to dance to. And so avant-garde didn't quite take off as what people had hoped. It took off with the revolutionary groups who were a part of that counterculture environment, especially in the United States and in Europe, especially in Germany, actually. There's this odd counterculture movement in Germany. Okay, but during the late 1960s, rock music was attracting more people than jazz. Okay, so here are our three paradoxes, our three different avenues, given the avant-garde's outside status. Okay, so it influenced a surprising number of established but neglected musicians. So there's a lot of musicians who, especially African American musicians, who were classically trained, who couldn't find work playing in clubs and didn't have big audiences, and so this style of avant-garde music then basically allowed them to become a little bit more famous or to become known again. Okay, the second paradox is that it was more inclusive than any previous jazz style. More people were able to play it because it was so free. It wasn't as structured, and because a lot of people weren't trained in the structure of jazz music, this allowed this free style, this kind of openness to the music, allowed more and more people to play. And it proved to be as durable as mainstream jazz. It proved to test the test of time. Okay, it almost fell off the cliff. It almost died away because it was so hard to listen to at times, and it was so out there. But it still is played today. Okay. We got this guy, Sun Ra. Okay, he created a cosmology in which he came to Earth from Saturn. But his avant-garde orchestra, okay, his his band name, his group, okay, played a lot of very out there style of music. And he was kind of an out there kind of guy. Music was really great, but he's that very kind of hip, like, yo man, the stars are gonna align and the sound is gonna be great, and just enjoy the music and hopefully you get something out of this. And he would just play all around the piano. Almost, to me, it seems almost random, even though in his brain, his mind, and his talent, he is creating something very artful. But to me, as more of a classically trained musician, it really was very hard to hear, hard to listen to. Okay, we also get Michal Richards Abrams, okay, piano player and composer as well. Hugely influential in creating the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. Okay, and he found a lot of claim both in Chicago as well as New York in terms of a musician in the late 1970s, early 1980s, as well as an advocate for the advancement of musicians and getting new styles of music out there, and recognizing and being able to recognize in a professional manner through the AACM musicians who really weren't getting a lot of clout, yet their vibe was really prominent in the jazz world. Okay, we get some kind of out there musicians, some really talented musicians, such as Anthony Braxton, who wrote music for every type of musical ensemble, no matter what types of instruments were being played. Okay, here you can see he's playing a huge, massive contrabass saxophone. It's bigger than him, taller than him. If you were to put it right on the floor, it might be just as tall as him, but it's massive. It needs this, as you can see, it needs this stand in order for you to play it. There's no way you could hold this up. But he would create music for any kinds of instruments, very out there world instruments that are not part of the typical Western style. Okay, and then we come to Max Roach, very famous drummer. Okay, very, very influential. He could play different styles, and now, to be honest with you, percussionists and drummers in the time of avant-garde music really had a tough job ahead of them to be able to play with an instrumentalist who is playing in this style. You really had to be on the top of your game and really had to have good ears for listening to the instrumentalist and being able to kind of work your way around the drum kit to in some ways accompany the instrumentalist, but in some ways you're kind of just playing along with him, and sometimes it might line up, sometimes it doesn't. That's kind of the beauty of avant-garde music, is that everybody can play kind of, there are chord progressions, but everybody can play kind of what they want, when they want, as long as we line up at some point in time throughout the piece. Okay, we also get the World Saxophone Quartet, which was very popular in the 1980s, both in the United States and in Europe. Okay, and by 2008, the avant-garde style of music had been developing for 50 years. It still is played today. Okay, it still is just as hard to listen to for some. Okay, and it has influenced every kind of jazz in terms of the quality of sound, the types of instruments used, and the repertory, the forms and styles of actual written music, and the libraries, the music libraries that people have. They always have some form of head tunes or styles of avant-garde influenced music in their libraries. Okay, but then in a lot of major cities around Canada, around just North America in general, avant-garde music is still very much unknown. If you go to a city like Regina in Saskatchewan, or even if you go down to St. Louis, okay, St. Louis in the United States, avant-garde music, people could not tell you who plays avant-garde music. People may know the avant-garde art movement, which is very out there and freeing as well, but in terms of jazz and music, a lot of people don't know, which is really unfortunate. But in some major cities like Chicago, New York, even Los Angeles, and San Francisco especially, there's a lot of really cool things happening in terms of avant-garde jazz, which is still played today. Here's some music to have a listen to. Remember, these are the ones that I think are really important and great to listen to. Ornette Coleman, Cecil Taylor, okay, Sonny Rollins, The Bridge is a very great tune for this style of music. Okay, the World Saxophone Quartet. And if you really want to get out there, you really want to hear some really cool sounds, okay, take a listen to Sun Ra. He's, I don't know how to describe him. He's just out there. But the sounds are really cool. Impossible to dance to, but they're really... If you just want to relax, listen to Sun Ra. All right, folks. That's everything for this week in terms of jazz. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at any point in time. And don't forget to use this presentation or the slides to help you answer this week's discussion question. Have a wonderful week ahead. Bye for now.